Imagine expanding your team's abilities without adding headcount. With Element 451, AI assistants like admissions advisors and student success coaches work alongside your staff to deliver personalized experiences at scale, offer round the clock support, and uncover data driven insights. It's not just about doing more, it's about doing it smarter. Elevate your team with an AI workforce that delivers personalized, scalable, and impactful experiences across the student lifecycle. Learn more at element451.com. Welcome to the Higher Ed Geek Podcast, where we explore the impact of EdTech on the student experience with engaging, fun, and relevant conversations that honor the wide range of work happening all across the higher ed ecosystem. I'm your host, Dustin Ramsdell. I've been working in and around higher ed for the past decade, focused on student support and digital experience. Join me every week for discussions with some of the best minds in education technology. We'll be bringing you their perspectives on how digital transformation is reshaping the way we recruit, engage, and graduate learners. You'll hear firsthand accounts of how institutional leaders are developing their strategy, as well as get deeper on the stories of how these EdTech tools are being built to foster better student outcomes. With that, let's get to today's episode. So this episode is about something that I do really geek out about throughout all these conversations, if you haven't really kind of noticed it, is about how do ed tech platforms in higher education kind of integrate with one another, work better together? There's obviously a lot of technical pieces that go into that, but also kind of strategy, kind of change management, team management, like all these kind of other things sort of, get mixed up into this. But I think nowadays a lot of institutions are having, a plethora, a myriad of tools at their disposal to shape, whether it is the in-person experience of their students or the online experience. They've got a lot of stuff that needs to work and integrate together. So that's kind of what was on my mind when I reached out to Sarah for this episode. So before we get to anything else, if you want to briefly introduce yourself to everyone, talk about your background and what your current role is at Gettysburg College.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. My name is Sarah Kotlinski. I'm Director of Enrollment Systems and Analytics at Gettysburg College. I've been in the higher ed space for over 30 years and 25 of those at Gettysburg, but I'm new in this position, so since July of last year.
Yeah, and I think, we met, as we were recording of this, at the recent CampusESP User Summit here in Philadelphia. I can live in, I'll say liberally, the greater Philadelphia area. So I've appreciated that it's sort of welcoming of me kind of coming in to kind of just hang out and be in community. But you're kind of talking about this sort of topic writ large. So I wanted to kind of, kind of give mention. So if you want to talk about sort of your experience talking about this specific kind of instance of CampusESP integrations and everything. And I know you joined their Customer Advisory Board recently, which is pretty cool too. So just any reflections about that event? So that was sort of the impetus for this conversation happening.
Certainly. I think the first thing that I would say is that we are new CampusESP clients. We haven't even hit our 1-year anniversary yet. So it was my first CampusESP Summit. And I wasn't sure really what to expect going in because it was only one day. And I thought, boy, there's so much that we could talk about, but they were so efficient with the way they planned the schedule. And they really, really packed a lot into that time. What I loved about that particular summit is that the clientele was not just people doing the prospective parent side of CampusESP, which is, of course, the space in which I live, but also many current family side of CampusESP folks. And I appreciated the breadth of viewpoints. I also thought it was great to see how many varieties of institutions were represented. But we all had this common interest in and desire to make the parent and family experience joyful. And I felt like I had wonderful conversations with people throughout the day. As far as joining their Customer Advisory Board, well, I will tell you that, first of all, I am a big fan of any company that really does have a structured and active way to listen to their users. Because if you're not growing and evolving, you're you're stagnant. That's a terrible thing for any company to be doing. But I think that although it seems to me to be obvious that you would want to ask your end users what do they need and how would they like things to grow, not everybody does that. So kudos to Campus ESP for having this active customer advisory board. And secondly, I'm just so excited to be asked to join. We had a dinner afterwards, and the level of discussion was really exciting to me because we were thinking really strategically about what might the future look like for Campus ESP and the way it integrates with other platforms and the value that it adds for individual institutions. So I'm thrilled to be a part of that group.
And I guess as a brief follow-up, I think I listened to a couple other podcasts that you've been on recently that were very much centered in Slate, and that was like a big integration that they were kind of touting at this Campus ESP Summit. So what I understand is I think you've kind of been somebody who's sort of like generous with their time or seek out sort of those opportunities to like, have those kind of strategic conversations with other folks, I guess, especially like in the Slate space. So like any sort of like reflections on these sort of thing, I guess, just as you're even just saying that idea of like, on a sort of spiritual level, like you appreciate that these companies sort of make themselves available. I think it is such a powerful avenue to, elevate what you're building, if you are one of these companies. But I guess just like, you're now sort of embarking on kind of another experience, like what I imagine you've done a lot in the Slate space. So any reflections on kind of what that has meant to you? And now, you're kind of setting off on this new one.
Sure. It's funny because I actually just had a conversation about this with some Slate folks earlier this week. I am at a point in my career where it's really important to me to be thinking about what kind of legacy do I want to build, and do I want my work, of course, to benefit Gettysburg College, but I also want it to benefit the whole higher ed community, because in my space, we're really about making opportunity available for students. And so when you look through that lens, it's really easy to find the motivation to help other colleagues in similar roles at other institutions do the best work that they can do. Also think that, to be honest, I also think it's a great way to maximize your investment. One of the things that we always say here at Gettysburg, whenever we're talking about a new tech partnership, is we always say we want to be your favorite client, which I know we're not everybody's favorite client. But what I really mean when I say that is we want to be a client that is aggressive and innovative and curious and willing to push the boundaries, because whenever you company are thinking about some new feature, some new functionality, you want to have an idea that you say, hey, what about this? Or we're thinking about something like this. We'd love somebody to test it. You're going to come to clients that have that kind of relationship. So I think it's a win-win to do that.
Yeah, and I appreciate you saying that. And I think that's where like the sort of verbiage of like generosity, you are giving time and giving insights and input, and, not just sort of like hogging all this, because you're like, that's this like amazing novel way to do things. And you're like, I don't want anybody else to know. So yeah, I think that's also just, I feel sort of, drawn towards people, I think, that have that sort of energy of generosity with sort of, sharing their reflections and insights and strategies and tips and tricks and all those sort of things. And I think, yeah, everything you're saying is exactly right. And you're also now kind of teeing up my next question of just sort of, you at Gettysburg, like I sort of said, of, any higher institution is just, managing ever evolving tech stacks and everything. So, if you want to kind of just speak generally, if there's any sort of examples or things that you maybe want to reference, but like, what has been your approach at Gettysburg to managing ever expanding and evolving tech stacks?
I think the first thing that I would say in answer to that is making sure that the right pieces are in your tech stack and having some sort of rubric with which every opportunity that comes along. When I took over as Director of Enrollment Systems and Analytics, I've been here for, at that point, 24 years. I'd worked with a number of these colleagues for quite a while. And it was really important to me to have something with which to communicate my vision to people in a way that felt approachable and understandable. And so I thought about, I don't know if you're familiar with Rumi and the three gates of speech. There are three gates through which your speech should pass. Is it true? Is it kind? Is it necessary? And if it doesn't pass through those gates, you shouldn't say it. I thought about the same kind of concept, and I came up with my three gates of enrollment systems. So does it engage, does it inform, and does it simplify? And that was a way for me to say to these people with whom I'd worked for many, many years, this is kind of our North Star. This is our way forward. And what I didn't realize when I first came up with that concept is that that also became the best lens through which I could evaluate any new opportunity that came down the road. Because I will be the first person to tell you, I have what I call ooh, shiny syndrome, meaning if I see something cool, I get really excited about it and I want to do it. But this has been a lens through which I can say, that's cool, but it isn't serving these needs right now. So that's my first part of the answer is get the right pieces in your tech stack. My second answer is that once you feel like you've got the right pieces in the mix, then think about how you can do creative and kind of off-label things with them. So, and to me, a lot of that comes with the integrations. So don't just use a system out of the box as it comes, but think about how else you can take a piece from that and a piece from something else and a piece from a third system and then do something different with that. So this year we implemented three new pieces in our enrollment tech stack. And I was really excited about bringing snippets of engagement from each one of them into Slate and then combining that with some behavioral variables in Slate to have kind of an overall engagement score that we then used for our counselors throughout the yield season to help them really figure out, who's definitely coming, who's really not going to come no matter what we do, and then who's on the bubble, who do you need to spend your time with right now? And so to me, that's a big piece of a good management of a tech stack is looking at the pieces that can be consumed with information from other systems.
Yeah, I think just even as like a kind of quick follow-up, just to affirm, I think, what I've sort of observed a lot is that idea, like in higher ed, it's very easy to add, hard to take away. So that idea of doing those sort of evaluation and what's sort of your rubric for that, I think is super helpful. And then like, I think to me, integration oftentimes equals like simplicity or efficiency, like that idea of what you're saying. Like if I can get like essentially lead scoring, as a counselor that synthesizes like these myriad of tools, activities, and, things that happen all across the board, like certainly I can dive into those systems if I want to go deep. But like, if I can just get sort of this like score that tells me, yeah, like, and even then, like acknowledging that, like, depending on what I'm trying to do in any given moment or month or season, like, if we are trying to like get people across the finish line for enrollments for the upcoming term, yeah, I'm going to look at those people with a high score. But then obviously the other people aren't just being like, no, just blow them off, ignore them. It's just like, they just might not be ready yet. And you're going to approach that differently than you would, try to create a sense of urgency. Deadlines are coming up, whatever, for these people who presumably are interested in, you are trying to get, folks in for like an upcoming term or something. So I think it's just that idea of like, yeah, if you could get quick snapshots to inform action, to spend the time that you have, in the right way at the right time kind of thing. Yeah, that is, I think, an outcome that is sort of begets smart integration of like tech stack tools.
And I think it's interesting because you had mentioned, perhaps actually in our conversation before we started recording, but you talked about being digital first in terms of the way we deliver content and the way that we interact with students. And I don't disagree on one level, but on another level, I really think that systems in an ideal use ought to serve up a person-first connection. And that the systems can help you kind of sift through all the noise to find what those important connections might be, so that all of the things that I'm kind of onboarding are not taking away from the one-to-one connection that my staff is making with students and their families. They're just helping those connections to be more instantaneously meaningful. So you don't have to have as much small talk to have a sense of this is what's going to be of value to this student or to this family. And so if I know that those are going to be the concerns, and then I can start there, I can lead with that. The other thing I will say that I am a huge believer in, and it's kind of a small thing on one hand, but as you have this proliferation of tools that you're expecting people to be able to use, I am a humongous believer in deep links, right? Because if you have 3 or 4 tools that all address different aspects of the prospective student and family experience, and you have some shared data that you've brought into a CRM, but you, as you said, sometimes you need to go deeper. You don't want to be hopping to another system and then looking for a person. And maybe you get the right person, but maybe you don't. I mean, particularly if you're just looking based on, maybe it's just the name and it's not something that is particularly unusual, you might not even have the right record. And so that to me is something that I am very passionate about. And if a system doesn't have that as kind of a standard integration, I will find a way to build it. So, for example, with my Campus ESP to Slate integration, there was not available in the Campus ESP exports, there was no deep link to the individual parent or family member record, but there was a user ID. And I happened to notice that when I was in those parent or family records, the user ID was kind of embedded into the URL. And so I just chopped up the front of the URL and the end of the URL and used a concatenate export in Slate to kind of just stuff them all together. And then that was available so that people who are not my super tech users, they don't have to worry about any of the how or the kind of the magic behind the curtain. All they know is if I click this link, it gets me to that record as long as I have an active session in the other system. They don't need to know all the details of the how it happens. They just need to know that it works and it works reliably.
Yeah, that's great. And I think just a great example. And I know this is what sort of like resonated with me too about like your presentation at the summit was like the sort of like higher level, sort of like speaking to like why this matters. But then like you could easily just keep flipping back and forth of like the super technical, tactical like ways that you like did these things and everything, which I appreciate. And I think, yeah, it is like sort of the deep linking and then like the even just the like kind of seamless like transferring information back and forth, because sometimes it is just sort of like a one-way thing. So you either need to be more deliberate about like manually doing things, or just you have to like kind of deal with those gaps and stuff. But like, because I think you already mentioned a bit about like how you evaluate, and I think a bit about how you manage, but like, I guess anything else, like any other examples that maybe you feel like are very like kind of a hallmark of your tech stack that you work with integrating really well? Because I know you kind of get on the Slate and the Campus ESP kind of example. Anything else that comes to mind of like that feels sort of emblematic of how you evaluate and manage these sort of systems?
I think the other thing that I would say, I like to look at systems, not just what they're doing or the how that they're doing it, but also look at how might I employ that concept in a different arena, which probably sounds really vague. But to give you an example, and since we started off talking about Campus ESP, I'll talk a little bit more about them. One of the things that I loved with Campus ESP was this concept of being able to have content that can arrive in a way that makes sense to the families so they can subscribe to a newsletter and they can say how often they want to have it delivered and they can tell you what areas, what topics they're most interested in. But when we create content in the back end, those content pieces then kind of live in a place that Campus ESP pulls from. So if you come to the portal, if you log into Campus ESP, you can see those content items. If you subscribe to a newsletter on a weekly basis, you get some of those items every week, but maybe you only get the newsletter every month and they're still available. We don't have to think about scheduling them for all of these different ways that people are requesting delivery. And so this is really hopping into another arena, but within Slate, there is this slate.org, which serves the need of secondary school counselors and high school students as a way to interact with Slate institutions. And so they can, for example, if colleges make it available, then guidance offices, guidance staff can see the admission decisions that have been made on the students from their schools that have applied. And it's amazing functionality, and it's free to it's free to high schools, and so I'm a big fan of this. But within the slate.org area, there's a little spot for a institutional portal, and so every institution can build custom content for secondary school counselors in slate.org. Not many of them have done so. I mean, partly it's one more thing to kind of wrap your arms around. And I think for a long time there was, well, does anybody look at this? Which is absolutely, there's amazing data showing that school counselors really like this and they're in there on a regular basis. So we decided this past year that we were going to build a new slate.org portal for Gettysburg College. And when I thought about that, I thought, of course, we do send email newsletters to counselors and we do communicate important things via email to them. But I also thought, I know what my inbox looks like. I'm sure high school guidance offices, their staff inboxes are as crazy, if not more so than mine is. And so I thought about that model with Campus ESP where you take this content and you kind of create a piece that then you can draw from. And we co-opted some Slate functionality. We used Deliver, which is the email system built into Slate, but we had a separate special folder. And if you drop a piece of content into that folder, then it shows in a Campus ESP-esque newsletter in the portal for guidance counselors. And so to me, that's another big piece of these kinds of integrations is look at something that you see in another system and think about how else could you use it. I can give you another example going way, way back, way before Gettysburg was a Slate institution. We are a PeopleSoft school. And I happened to be talking to one of my financial aid colleagues who showed me this financial aid summary page that is native PeopleSoft, but there was nothing like that for admissions. And so I thought, well, why don't we have this? This is such a great idea. Put together a spec, and one of our programmers built it for me. I mean, we don't use it any longer because we're fully Slate now, but it was that same idea of seeing the best of something else and then saying, what could I do with that? How can I bring that into my arena?
Yeah, I think a lot of what I'm hearing there, even just through, I think there's very distinct examples is like, and I always, I guess, say this a lot. I worry people think I'm like waxing too poetic or whatever, but like having a sense of imagination, and like creativity and like the possible and what if and all that is like, so you can get inspiration from a lot of places. And that can, I think, inform how, certainly in the instance of like you're trying to put one and two together, two different systems, how can they play well together and just sort of have that kind of open mind there. But then even like just seeing how other things, how do other platforms approach this? How could I try to like, take from that to inform, what I'm trying to do over here where, that could end up being where it's like, okay, these are two separate things. They actually don't integrate, but like, I like how this does this. I would like for this to do this too. So like, may hopefully be some way to kind of, emulate that. But yeah, and I think it is just like also an acknowledgement of like, you'd want any platform to feel very flexible, like just in the way that like, some are just like very rigid and it's like, we just can't do that or something. Even if you have the best imagination in the world, they're like, nope, we can't do that. Or it would take a bunch of like dev work and, it's going to take time. Do we want to, make that investment just because like, this is sort of the like other side of the coin that like, sure, like all these people, all these users might have feedback about a certain tech platform. And I think a lot would talk a big game about that. But then like, that idea of like, well, we're not just going to do it for one client or something or whatever, like you could have tech platforms that sort of push back on some of these notions. So I think there is like an aspect of this, because I know there are folks that listen to the show that do work kind of in, the adjacent spaces to institutions. So like that idea that you need to build into sort of your philosophy and your culture to be earnestly trying to, make your platform flexible enough so that like users can kind of adapt and do what they need to, that it can be very easily integrated with other platforms and other platforms can kind of integrate with your tool. And then just like really being, responsive and accessible. And because I think it would inform your strategy in a different way, because you might be in this place where you feel like you're just getting these random ad hoc singular pieces of feedback about what you should or shouldn't do. But if you are, creating sort of, advisory boards and councils or this or that, like, if you have these communities and different spaces and places to garner feedback, then you probably are going to be like, oh, wow, yeah, okay, like 2/3 of people all agree that we should do like this thing. That's going to be worth it for us to like build that, do something, there. Then, whatever we think, from our gut, just from our perspective, is like, well, we're not actually using it every day to do the thing that it is, intended to do. Yeah. So I think those are, I guess, some of the things that I'm kind of sensing and hearing and feeling from what you're kind of reflecting on there. But
And I think I would say, I mean, two things just in reaction to that. First is that even if you have something that maybe only one or two clients are asking for, if you have a really creative and innovative client and you build something in partnership with them, they can become almost an adjunct sales force for you because they're excited about what they've built. And they can help other places see the value in this new approach or this new endeavor. And so I would definitely say, listen to your unicorns because they're going to lead the way. I think that's a really important thing for tech leaders to hear. And the other thing I just really want to thank you for is you touched on the creativity. And I just think that is such an important point for people who are kind of leading the future in this industry is I know in my life, people think, oh, you're just a tech person that's kind of cut and dried. But to me, it's joyful. And it's joyful because it gives me the opportunity to be creative. I love to talk with people, talk with staff, talk with families, and hear a need for something that does not exist now, and then come up with an idea in my mind and work with a partner or on my own or however it turns out to be, but to actually take that all the way through to fruition, there's a lot of joy in that work. And it's because of the creativity to me that I get that joy out of it. So I'm just really, I love to hear that from you as well, that you see that and appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we're winding down here, hopefully to get kind of some, I'll sort of say this is like a little bit of a hot take if you want to kind of just, condense it down, is, speaking of sort of evaluating and managing, tech stacks, like what are you maybe adding on, potentially taking away and those sort of things. Something that I kind of like ended up at was like this notion of like, what is the balance of institutional uniformity? Like the entire institution uses like one platform versus like departmental independence, because there could be just different functional area use cases for things they can kind of evaluate and manage on their own. I'm sure there's like a sweet spot in the middle somewhere, but like, do you kind of have like a perspective, a take on that idea of balancing institutional uniformity with departmental independence when it comes to managing a tech stack?
Yes. So I am firmly in the departmental independence camp and have been really my whole career. I started The very first CRM I ever worked with was something called Sequitur Recruitment Plus, which was purchased by the College Board, but it was a startup product once upon a time. And it was really the very best thing out there at the time for small college admissions offices of the type in which I worked at that point. I think that it's really hard for big conglomerates to be nimble. And we know that the recruitment landscape is changing constantly. And so I love having these niche pieces that meet specific needs and meet them really well. And that's something that we've chosen here institutionally as well, that we are going to invest in those integrations because we want to reap the benefits of those individually specific strong systems. On the other hand, I do really appreciate that there are extra hurdles that come along with it. The integrations aren't always seamless. There's definitely work behind the scenes that needs to happen. And I also think it's really important. Not that this is ever unimportant, but it raises data governance to an even more critical level. Because as you have all of these different systems, they need to be using common definitions, right? So if I am looking at net revenue and financial aid is looking at net revenue and our budget office is looking at net revenue, we have to be sharing a common definition and make sure that our systems are not just that we have a common understanding, but that our systems are calculating things in the same way. Because if not, that's when I think these individual departmental specific systems can start to lead you astray.
Yeah. And I think for me, like it feels like departmental independence is fine as long as you are, like you're saying, with like the data governance, like collaborating, communicating, sort of like, staying in touch with your colleagues so you don't like end up veering off and going off, and kind of the Wild West. Because I think, the idea of like uniformity, order does sort of denote, some rigidity and maybe some limitations. But I think for my own hot take, I guess just to share my perspective as I'm saying it, would be, like probably like 60-40 on the like departmental independence as long as you are doing that collaboration piece. Because I think there is in my mind like, oh my God, yeah, it'd be so great if like everyone's using the same platform. They're all sort of interacting and engaging in the same place. But like, I think that is a bit naive, I'll admit, in terms of like that being a practical reality. But because I think, there's maybe not one thing that could do all the sort of like, functional needs that a lot of departments would want or need and that sort of thing. So, but we'll wrap up as we always do then, with kind of all this being said of, evaluating and managing tech stacks, integrations, all that good stuff. And, a lot of what you spoke to too, just being kind of a strong kind of user advocate and community member, with these variety of platforms and things that you use. But like, the floor is yours. Advice for fellow higher ed leaders now as we close out this episode, because I feel like you could go a lot of different directions, but, advice for folks as we're wrapping up this episode.
I think I could go many different directions with this, but I think the thing that I would say is to refine and articulate your vision. Everything stems from that. If you can distill what's important and the criteria that you're using to make choices into things that are understandable by others at your institution and by the people who work for you, that's the very first step. And if you've done that, then you've got a great springboard to be flexible and adaptable. And honestly, Dustin, you just never know in higher ed. From day to day, you get up and read the news and you say, well, my day just changed today. But I think having kind of that grounding base to start from, that's the suggestion that I would make.
Yeah. And to me, that it's like, it should feel like empowerment, like that you are empowered with like a rubric to evaluate your tech stack, that you're not like, wasting time on tools that aren't, getting you where you want to go and wasting money on things or, whatever else. It's like, you can kind of, like you said, like ground in like, we know that we're kind of doing everything that serves the goals that we're aiming for. And, we have the tools to do that. And, we going to stay in touch with each other if it sort of feels like, oh man, this is like just not getting us where we want to as quickly or as effectively as we want. So maybe we do need to kind of, revisit how are things kind of working well together, or is there new different tools out there that, are going to do more of what we're looking for. But I think, this space in particular, certainly with like, admissions and enrollment and just like, this, has changed so much even in the past few years, whether it is like preferences of prospective students or just, different requirements or whatever else. So I think that idea of like not getting so much like whiplash or whatever else, if you can't have that grounding, whatever it is for you, like determine what that is and keep that in mind, keep it top of mind, and keep it, in a way that's sort of like very translatable, or sort of people can easily sort of, integrate it into their kind of routine, their mindset and everything. So,
I will say, I don't think it shows here, but it's framed on my wall. And so and right where it's like right where I look, right above my monitor. So I see it all the time. It keeps me focused, but it also, when somebody comes in and we have a conversation and we're talking about something that I don't think is going to work for those reasons, I just have to point at it and like, oh yeah, okay, that's right. We are all working towards a common goal here. So it's really helpful in that way too.
Yeah. And not just, like anecdotal gut check or just sort of like, doing things in a sense of like, because I think unfortunately all institutions are like, oh my God, we have a huge budget deficit. We just have to cut costs or something. And they're kind of just doing things arbitrarily, not based on any sort of like rubric or kind of rules and those sort of things. So yeah, that's, I think, where we'd hope for any institutional leader to be. I think that is great advice, ways to connect with you in the show notes as usual. But just thank you so much for hanging out and sharing all that you did and for all the great things that you do, I think, just for the whole higher ed tech community. So
thank you so much. This has been a fun conversation. I really enjoyed it and look forward to hearing from your next guest.
Thanks for listening to the Higher Ed Geek podcast. This show is a proud member of the Enrollify Network, home to Higher Ed's largest collection of podcasts. Enrollify is where higher ed goes to grow, so be sure to check out our other podcasts, webinars, video clips, blogs, and more. Visit enrollify.org and subscribe for all the latest details and content drops directly in your inbox. Enrollify is brought to you by Element 451, the digital workforce platform for higher ed. Learn more at element451.com.